everyone. I'm Timothy Harfield, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Blackboard Analytics. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today, live from the IBM booth at EDUCAUSE. Today I'm joined by Drs. Van Davis, who's Associate Vice President for Higher Education Research and Policy at Blackboard, as well as Dr. John Whitmer, Director of Analytics and Research here at Blackboard. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what analytics means and some of the ethical implications of that. And in that vein, I'd like to begin with a question about an announcement that the two of you are making here at Blackboard about a new artificial intelligence and ethics in higher education initiative. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So we've heard a number of our partners as well as ourselves thinking about how we can use these new technologies, have been very aware that they bring up a number of ethical concerns. This has been something many people have been thinking about. Not only can we do this, and are these technologies that are accurate, but what do they imply about what kind of decisions we make and the kind of oversights that we should have. This is something that a number of our campuses that we work with have raised to us, and one that we think is an issue that's very serious and very significant, and one that really requires consideration. There's new legislation coming out, in particular the GDPR in Europe, that really raises some new ways that we should be thinking about machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we're being told we're rock stars, so that's what you get playing live. And so we're bringing together a group of leaders from campuses, from partners with Blackboard, legal institutions, to really think about sets of principles for how we can reconsider the role of ethics and what ethics should be in the age of artificial intelligence, so that we can continue to use these new technologies, we can continue to take advantage of these solutions to improve solutions that we bring, and frankly other technology providers bring, while also kind of keeping in line with the spirit of ethics and really being fair and equitable to students. Van, maybe you have more to say about that.
Well, I think, one of the things that has really stood out for me in the conversations I've been having with institutions is this desire to want to do right by students, but this recognition that we're really beginning to move into a territory that we're not used to moving into, and how we balance out the potential benefits of artificial intelligence, especially around student success, with not just the privacy concerns, but also concerns about making sure that we don't repeat mistakes from the past whenever educational entities have used data in ways that has not always been beneficial to all students. And so being able to have this sort of conversation and really think through this is something that is really going to be critical as we try to suss out where it is that we're going and how we make sure that we do no harm.
I wanted to follow up, and just to give a specific example of this as well, is in creating predictions, right? We create predictions not based on magic, right, but based on math and science. That's based on the data of what's happened in the past. But to some degree, the point of education is to change, right? Is to change what's happened, is to change these kind of paths that students are headed down. So how do we keep those things in mind so that we don't, in a sense, there's this fear, this concern, and it's not an ungrounded fear, it's a real worry that by using predictive analytics, training it on existing data, that we would bring biases into the model. And this is something that a lot of people are rightly thinking about, and we think there's a right way or some thoughtful ways we can go about that don't cause us to throw the baby out with the bathwater and forget about using the past, but to be thinking about it and thoughtful on it. So just to give this as a tangible example of some of the ways that we're thinking about issues that come into account. The second one that I use as an example is also this idea of oversight, right? And we have actually within the GDPR the right of a student to be able to look at the results of an algorithm and to evaluate it, right? Anything that's used to make a judgment against us, that students should have the right to evaluate it, which is a great idea in principle. The problem is that some of the new machine learning and deep learning models that are out there, we actually cannot interrogate at the same level of simply looking at a list of variables and looking at the weights they have. Those kind of calculations are no longer present. We don't have that kind of visibility by definition. within the new kind of approaches to artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how can students, educators, other people who are responsible for using these algorithms make sure that they're making good judgments and that they're fair, right? How can we bring that same idea to light when you can't simply kind of, peek behind the curtain? Because when you peek behind the curtain, it's like me looking inside of the hood of my car. I have no idea what I'm looking at, right? Or looking at the computer, right, that operates my Prius dashboard. I can't do anything with it, right? So we have a similar situation as we bring these new technologies to bear. So that's something that why we're bringing this group of thoughtful people together, because they're not easy answers, we don't think.
How is data science being conducted and used at Blackboard today?
So there's three ways. So we're baking in data science into kind of the very core fabric of what we do. Part of what we're doing, and there's kind of three techniques we use. One of them is simulation. So before we develop a new feature that we put into applications, in many cases we're having that feature informed by existing practices. So if we're going to create something, we look at what people actually do to see if that gives us ideas as to whether it's a good idea or not. We're also, in many things that we create, there's an underlying relationship we believe to be true or a hypothesis, so we can actually go out and test hypothesis. In many cases, we have outcome variables. We can look at relationships with grade. So that's another way that we look at this. And then the third way is that we're using machine learning and unsupervised kind of techniques so we can look for latent patterns that exist that we may not be aware of, and then use that to, again, better organize our interfaces, better look for features that might be helpful in the new products that we create.
Van, a question for you. To switch gears just a little bit. So you recently compiled a series of interviews with American higher education leaders that looks back on the last 20 years and actually looks forward to the next. What major themes stood out for you as a result of these conversations?
Well, there were a number of themes that stood out. There were five sort of in particular. What came up over and over again was that our current and traditional models of higher education are just not well suited for what's really a rapidly changing, globally connected world. That the business, and related to that our current business models are no longer going to work. And I think just this week we've seen ample evidence of that with the merger of Strayer and Capella. We saw, Purdue buy Kaplan. So we're beginning to see this contraction. And related to that too was a third theme that what sort of runs through the stream that runs through all of this is that the need for actionable data. Higher ed has produced data in buckets, but being able to really do something with that and make it actionable is going to be critical in order to meet this changing world. And a piece of that is what happens with the faculty, and that we are looking at, because of the data, we're looking at some significant changes in the role of faculty in higher education, and potentially some very significant pedagogical shifts. And part of that came up over and over in these interviews was this question of how AI is going to be used in classrooms for academic purposes. This idea of cognitive tutoring. If you've got a cognitive tutor, then what does that mean that the professor is going to do? What is the role of the instructor now? And how does that instructor begin to act more as a facilitator of learning? And then the final theme that came up that was sort of related to that is that those very shifts are going to force some really serious change management on the part of institutions, and especially being able to work with individuals on campuses to sort of redefine what their role is in what is going to be a rapidly changing world where it's not going to look the way it is right now.
So I believe most of the interviews that went into this took a very North American perspective. And so what would the same piece look like, do you think, were you to look at it more from a global perspective? And this is maybe a really easy answer. Maybe it's identical and maybe not? What are your thoughts on that sort of global perspective?
Well, we're actually starting to do the research for a global piece. So we're at the very beginning stages of interviewing global higher education leaders to do just that, to see what is it going to look like whenever we expand our focus. I don't think it's actually an easy question to answer, because I think that what we're going to find is that there are a variety of regional differences. We already know that we're seeing technology being leveraged differently in different regions. So I think my suspicion is that we will see very similar themes emerge in probably Europe, and that we may see some variations of that in other areas of the world, especially in Asia and the Middle East. So it'll be interesting in about 3 or 4 months, whenever we have the interviews finished, to see just how this is beginning to play out in other parts of the world.
So as we close here, 50 minutes is basically up, but we kind of want to get both of your perspectives on what's coming next specifically for analytics in higher education. We're looking, some of your work has looked at the next 20 years, but what if we look more short term? What do you think in the next 5 years, each of you think we're going to see in the analytics space in higher education, and education in general maybe?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think number one, analytics is going to stop being this thing we call analytics and something separate, and it's just going to become a fundamental part of the technology solutions, especially enterprise level technology solutions. It's something people are already expecting. We're seeing in RFPs that this access to data, real time data, detailed data is something that campuses are demanding and expecting. So I think access to data and having these very fine-grained learning traces is what people will begin to expect and see. They will also begin to expect and see this data integrated and embedded into the kind of solutions that are created. And so that's something, again, we're working toward, that you shouldn't have to go to submenu 3 to look at reports to get your analytics, having them come up and be bubbled into the way you make decisions. You should know if a student hasn't logged in a week without having to go and look for them. So I think we're going to be increasingly see this. It's kind of like, the Internet of Things that's coming into place, or the way we use the internet for so many things. I think that the internet is just going to become an analytics, and these kind of analysis conducted in the background are going to become a core competency and a core feature. We have been developing the algorithms to do so, and Timothy, you've been a part of this with the LAK community and others for some time, that we've been developing these algorithms for a long time, and we've got some pretty decent accuracy. I mean, some very high probability power at this point, so I think we are ready to be able to deploy them, I think, with integrity and belief. I think the other thing we'll see that's new, that's going to become very different, is a focus on interventions and outcomes. So based on this, these insights, based on this data, what is it that we can and should be doing, and what's the difference? We're already beginning to see campuses asking that question, but I think it's this kind of natural evolution, really. Like, first we need data, then we're getting data-driven insights embedded, and then third, looking at the impact or result of that in practice.
Yeah, I agree with John. I think that this is going to be something that is just assumed to be there. I think it's really interesting. Campus Computing released their 2017 CIO study this morning, and one of the things that was surfaced in those interviews was that an overwhelming majority of CIOs believe that analytics is going to be critical in the next 3 years, and are anticipating that it will be a priority in their spending, and are absolutely not happy with what that infrastructure looks like on their campuses right now. So I think the other thing that we're going to see as this becomes really baked in is we're going to see more institutions being very deliberate about what they're expecting, and being more prescriptive about what they're expecting, and really expecting this to be embedded across not just the academic side, but being able to be embedded in the administrative suite as well. And that can raise some really interesting opportunities for institutions to really begin to think in a critical way, and do what some of our institutions have already started doing, which is to democratize that data and let everyone across the campus be able to look at it to really drive collaborative decision making, and that can really change, I think, the academic and the institutional cultures in ways that we haven't really seen yet.